Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Wizards podcast. It's your host, the real Ed Oliver. And today we have special guest Chase Hughes from NBC Sports Washington. But before we get started, I just want to thank you guys for making Locked On Wizards your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. And Chase, how are you feeling today?
Doing great, man. Ready for the draft, although I'm always kind of sad when the pre-draft process is over because it's so much fun to just watch film and try to predict who's going to be good. But it's all leading up till tomorrow.
Yeah, it's crazy. A lot of stuff's going on, a lot of rumors. So, yeah, it is crazy. A lot of debating on which player is better than the other, or should you trade up for a guy, different things like that. It's a lot of fun. So just want to start off with Bradley Beal made a tweet last night, kind of like a cryptic tweet a little bit, or something that, kind of like a Montrezl Harrell type of tweet where you have to bring
I like that. It was very Montrezl Harrell-like.
Yeah, it was similar to that. So he said, wait, huh? And then there was a report from Mike Soto saying that Bradley Beal is going to opt out of his contract. What did you get from that tweet? Because a lot of Wizards fans were confused on that tweet from Bradley Beal.
Yeah, I could see why they were confused because of the wording. I think what happened there is Mike Scotto, who is a very good reporter, gets a lot of stuff right, was trying to get ahead of a news story, and the way it was worded made it seem more newsworthy than it actually was, because we've known that Bradley Beal was going to opt out of the final year of this contract for a while. I mean, I would go back to training camp when he talked about the upcoming season and referred to it as the last season on his deal. So that signaled then, months ago, that he was going to opt out. We all know that he's going to opt out to get a new contract. The news will be when he does actually opt out, not that he plans to opt out. That'll be very minor news. The actual news will be, okay, what is the decision and what are the terms of the contract with whichever team he signs that contract? Is it the Wizards? Is it another team? I still think it's going to be the Wizards. Is it going to be the full Supermax? We'll see. Maybe it's a little bit lower than that. I don't know, but that's going to be the actual news in this process.
Right. And if it's a little bit lower, like how much of a difference does it make in the Wizards salary cap? Does it really create a lot of cap space for them to bring another star in per se? I have heard reports, Mark Stein also reported that Bradley Beal sees himself that he wants to be the Dirk Nowitzki of the Wizards, and Dirk later in his career took some pay cuts. So if Bradley Beal did take something lesser than the 35% of the salary cap, would that help? How much would that really help to bring in another star player?
I mean, it would give them a little bit of breathing room. I don't think it's going to be a situation like Tom Brady in the NFL where, he's making $10 million a year when he could be making $30 million a year. And all of a sudden you can, sign two more wide receivers or something like that. But he did float that possibility in his interview with Taylor Rooks of Bleacher Report. And also, I think if you're the Wizards, you got to try to get him a little bit lower than that number, right? Just because that's the smart thing to do, the smart business approach. And also, he is coming off a down year where he only played 40 games and his numbers dropped. So I think if you're the Wizards, you have to start a little bit lower than where you're probably going to ultimately sign him without, of course, insulting him or bringing the number so low that it behooves him to leave in free agency because he can get the same number elsewhere, maybe with a better chance to win. I think it's still going to be more than the $184 million that I think it's projected that he could get with another team across 4 years. But who knows? Maybe it's a little bit lower. But yeah, in terms of what type of flexibility you would give them, probably not a whole lot.
Right, 100%. So the Wizards have been connected to Malcolm Brogdon a lot over the past 48 hours. What have you heard with that situation? And if you had to put a percentage chance on it, how much do you think it's likely the Wizards would trade for Malcolm Brogdon? And what do you think would it include? Would it include the 10th pick of the draft?
Well, I think they've liked Malcolm Brogdon for a while. I mean, the fact that he played at UVA, I think as soon as John Wall's career here was kind of winding down and you start looking at point guards around the league, I think Brogdon's been interesting them ever since then. And if you look at just like the prototypical point guard to have next to Bradley Beal, Malcolm Brogdon kind of checks off every box, right? I mean, he's big for the position. He's like 6'4". Bradley Beal at 6'3" is probably a little bit undersized on the defensive end for a shooting guard. He's a really good shooter. His final year in Milwaukee, it's a few years ago at this point, but he was a 50, 40, 90 guy. And most importantly, he's a really good defender, and he's also just a really smart player to run your offense. So it makes so much sense that they would like a guy like Malcolm Brogdon. Now, I'll believe it when I see it, and I say that because the Pacers have essentially had him on the trade block for like 2 years now, right? And they haven't pulled the trigger on it. And I know they have Tyrese Halliburton, but they got Tyrese Halliburton at the deadline, and we'll see. I mean, I just have a feeling that the asking price must be pretty high. Why haven't they traded him yet if there were reasons for them to trade him like a year ago or 2 years ago? So I think the Wizards will try, but I don't think they want to part with that 10th overall pick. I think if they do, it's going to be really difficult to pry that away from them because, Tommy Shepard really values his first round picks. And I know he said during his press conference earlier in the week that the fact that they may end up, sending that first round pick next year out due to the John Wall, Russell Westbrook trade, and he could maybe recoup another first round pick. It would be tough to build a roster if you're trading away first round picks in consecutive years, especially if you're going to have a contract like Bradley Beal's on the books. So as far as the percentage goes, I think it's lower than 50. I'd probably put it like 30% because yes, he fits them perfectly, but the asking price is probably going to be fairly steep. And also, he makes a pretty decent salary. Like you got to fit that in the salary cap as well. So I think that there's more reason to think that it won't happen than it will happen. But certainly, they're going to explore that possibility because he would fit so perfectly.
Right. It's interesting because a lot of ESPN Woj has connected the Wizards with Malcolm Brogdon a lot. Same with the Knicks over the past 24 to 48 hours. So it is intriguing. Like you brought up the salary, you would probably have to include a KCP or Ish Smith or maybe a Kyle Kuzma. What do you think their ceiling would be with Brogdon, and what do you think a package would look like for Malcolm Brogdon?
Well, I think their ceiling would be definitely a playoff team. I think they'd be in the playoffs, maybe as a 6 or 7 seed. You got to keep in mind the Eastern Conference, if it's going to be as good as it was last year, is much deeper than the East that we're accustomed to. I mean, you might have to win 46, 47 games just to get one of those lower seeds, right? I mean, the play-in tournament this year required a winning record, and not just the Hawks and the Hornets were both good teams that in other years in the East would have been like the 6th seed, and they were battling for 9th and 10th. So it's really difficult to make the playoffs. I think they would be a playoff team, though. Obviously, there'd be some big question marks with Brogdon's health, with Porzingis's health, with Bradley Beal's health. Those who are, I think that would be the 3 players that would really be the core of the team. I think in order to get a deal done with Indiana, you'd have to, I think you'd have to match the money, obviously, but I think you'd probably also have to part with like a Rui Hachimura or a Denny Avdia or maybe a Corey Kispert or maybe some collection of those guys. I think you'd have to match the money. And I think Indiana would probably be most interested in the young guys because that's kind of been their MO is not necessarily trading for draft picks, but trading for young, cheap players who are on the rise. Going back to that Paul George deal when they got Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. So I think those are the types of players that would interest them. And yeah, maybe you would have to include a KCP just to match the money.
Right. So yeah, it would take a lot to bring in Brogdon. You brought up the injuries, and Porzingis has had history of injuries as well. So it's very risky. Putting in pick 10 for Brogdon would definitely be a risky move for Tommy Shepard. But I do want to ask you about some other guards that the Wizards have been connected to, such as possibly a Colin Sexton or Jaden Ivey. But before we do get to that, just make sure you guys check out the One Live NBA Draft Show. It's not enough for Locked On. Every show is going live on draft night. So join me 15 minutes after our pick at Locked On Wizards on YouTube for the immediate reaction from your local expert. Subscribe now to Locked On Wizards so you know when I go live. This episode is also brought to you by Arcade One Up. Boom shakalaka. We have big news. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade One Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. People are obsessed with NBA Jam, and I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Now, one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams, no fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number 1 up.com. arcade1up.com. For an estimated early September ship date, Arcade 1UP is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $399. Check this out. They are giving away an NBA Jam Shaq edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/locked on. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/locked on. You got till July 8th to enter to win NBA Jam Shaq edition. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? All right. So the Wizards have been somewhat connected to Colin Sexton and checking in on SGA. So get Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and DeJounte Murray. What percentage chance do you see some of those moves happening, or whatever you heard recently?
Well, I think it's pretty close to zero for SGA or DeJounte Murray. I mean, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, just look at what the Thunder have tried to get for all their players. It's first-round picks. And the Wizards have a bunch of them tied up in protections. And, you don't want to look too far down the road because, you're talking about 2028 first-round pick, for instance. That's after Bradley Beal's prime. I don't think you want to trade that pick unless it's extremely heavily protected. DeJounte Murray is 25-year-old all-star, someone that the Spurs invested a lot in his development and have him on a team-friendly deal. And they're looking forward. Like, they're not like at the beginning stages of a rebuild. They're trying to collect young players and make the playoffs next year with Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell and all the I think impressive young players that they put together on their roster. Colin Sexton, I also think, is pretty unlikely. He's a really good player. I like him. But if you listen to how Tommy Shepard and Wes Unseld Jr. have described their ideal point guard this offseason, it's basically the exact opposite of Colin Sexton. Like, he is sort of like a Spencer Dinwiddie type player in that he's put his head down and attack the rim. And he's a good scorer and a good offensive player, but he's not really the set the table floor general that they're looking for. He's also, maybe not the defense first guy that they're looking for. So I think it's pretty unlikely for him. I think Jaden Ivey is fairly unlikely. I can't discount the fact that they will try because they tried to move up. They've tried to move up in several drafts, but they tried to move up, for instance, in 2020 to get Denny Avdia. They tried to trade up to the 4th pick with the Bulls, and it didn't end up happening. And luckily for them, in their eyes at least, he fell to them at the 9th overall pick. I think they balked at the asking price. And, if they really wanted Denny, then they know what the asking price is to move up to 4. And it's going to be extremely steep. I mean, the Kings, if they wanted to get draft picks, they could probably get 3 first-round picks from a team trying to go from 10 to 4. If the 2019 trade between the Hawks and the Pelicans that sent DeAndre Hunter to Atlanta, if that's any indication, that is sort of the ballpark framework of what the trade would be. And although I love Jaden Ivey as a prospect, I think I could make the argument he's the second best player in this draft. And I think his floor is really high in addition to his ceiling being very high. If you have Bradley Beal at 20, going into his age 29 season, and you're going to rest the hopes on a guy who's 20, there's an element of risk there. I feel like what you would trade for Jaden Ivey, you might be able to get a more established star for the same price, and that guy would fit the competitive timeline with Bradley Beal a lot better. And also, it's just a lot to give up for a guy who ultimately is an unproven commodity. I think he's going to be really, really good. And if they do make that trade, I think Wizards fans will have a lot to be excited about. But it's the type of risk that I wonder, is that the right risk for them to take given where they are in their own timeline with Bradley Beal?
Yeah, it is intriguing because Jaden Ivey, he can be a great player, but just like any rookie, he wouldn't, he probably wouldn't move the needle day one.
It's going to take probably a few years, right?
Right. Yeah, to hit his full potential. He may come in averaging, 15 points a game, but it could be, it could be very inefficient or, turnovers here and there, simple rookie mistakes, so they could still be kind of the middling record where they are right now. But like you said, 2 to 3 years from now, he could really have that all-star potential. And does that really match their timeline? As far as Jaden Ivey, there's another trade where I did find, which is somewhat similar. Dario Saric and pick 11. I want to say the Timberwolves traded him to
the Suns.
The Suns for pick 6. So that's somewhat of a similar trade there, which is less than what the other trade that you brought to the Hawks and the I forgot the other team. But it would be a steep price. Kyle Kuzma, I know he's brought up a lot. How do you see his future with the Wizards? Do you think he's somebody that the Kings would take a look at if you included like a Kuzma, pick 10, and then one of the 3 young guys? Do you think that would entice the Kings or something that they could use?
Well, the thing here is that the Kings are the state of their franchise is they've got the longest NBA playoff drought of 16 years, right? And the whole idea of them trading the 4th pick seems to be that they want to compete sooner than later. I ultimately think they're not going to be able to pass up the talent that Jaden Ivey is, and he would fit, I think, pretty well alongside De'Aaron Fox. But if they do want to make a win now move, as they did by trading Tyrese Halliburton for Sabonis, then yeah, it could make sense to include Kyle Kuzma. You know, I have to remind everyone that they tried to trade for Kyle Kuzma last summer, right? And Kuz has said it himself. He thought he was going to Sacramento. So we know that they like Kyle Kuzma. I think if it was the 10th pick and Kyle Kuzma, I think, I don't know if one of their young players is the 3rd piece to get that done. I think it would cost more than that. But if it is a unique situation where they just want to get out of, the top 4 because they want to win now, well, Kyle Kuzma would make a lot of sense. And, not only have they been interested in him, but you have De'Aaron Fox, you have Sabonis. He's a complementary player to those guys. I don't know if I would do it if I was Sacramento, but considering the state of where they are and how much they want to win now, yeah, you could probably justify that. So that would certainly be the offer I would lead with if I were the Washington Wizards, because I'm not trying to give up a bunch of 1st-round picks just to move up to 4, as good as Jaden Ivey is.
Mm-hmm. All right, and so let's transition to the draft here. And as far as the draft, Tommy Shepard has said he's looking for dogs this all season. So how have the workouts looked so far? How have the Wizards' workouts looked so far? From what you've seen, who are some players that stood out? I know Dyson Daniels had a good workout that was compared to Aaron Holiday's workout. And I know you don't want to just judge players off of workouts because nothing against Aaron Holiday. He's had a solid career, but he hasn't, turned into an all-star caliber player. So who has really impressed you from watching some of the workouts, and who do you think the Wizards have really, really liked from some of their workouts?
Well, we don't get to see much of the workouts except for the shooting. So what I've heard about the workouts is from people who are actually in the room. And Dyson Daniels, yes, I've heard had a great workout. He came in, and the question marks about his athleticism and his shooting, I think he proved that those aren't necessarily valid question marks. I mean, he's 6'7", 6'8". He was the first guy in years. You mentioned Aaron Holiday. He's the first guy apparently since him. This is sort of hearsay, but first guy since him to finish this drill called 20 lines in 2 minutes, where the Wizards make you run from baseline to baseline 20 times in 2 minutes. And he finished. And he also set the shuttle record, or at least this year's record, at the combine. So he's very, very quick. He's very big. He's fast. He may not be like eye to eye at the rim when he jumps, but that doesn't mean he's not athletic. Tyrese Halliburton's a guy who I'd point to. It's like, well, everyone slept on his athleticism because he wasn't throwing down dunk contests like dunks, but he had the length, he had the quickness, he had the quick twitch sort of movement that is definitely, representative of athleticism and athletic ceiling. So Dyson Daniels was really good in the workout. And also you can just tell talking to him that, he might be 19, 20 years old, but he carries himself like a 5-year veteran. Like, that guy is a professional. The detail that he thinks through the game and the way he presents himself, you can just tell he's going to be a good NBA player. Ochai Agbaji, I've heard, had a good workout as well. I think he shot the ball really well. If the Wizards want to, fill a need like they did last year with Corey Kispert, I think he could make a lot of sense because he was a really good shooter and he is a 4-year player like Kispert. And also he would present some long-term upside because he had a good combine in terms of his measurables. He's got a big wingspan, 39-inch vertical, is one of the biggest at the combine this year. And I heard Beauchamp was pretty impressive in his workout. He didn't shoot all that well when we saw him shoot after the drill portion of the workout was done. But I always cut some guys some slack because they have to go through that 20 lines in 2 minutes drill before they shoot. And anyone's ever shot a basketball knows that if your legs are tired, it affects your shooting. So he was impressive in the workout. I think those guys I've heard good things about. Those are the 3.
Right. Have they had any private workouts that they've released to you?
Not that I am fully aware of, but I would imagine after the draft, if they pick someone that wasn't reported to have worked out, that we'll find out that they did work out with them.
Right.
Um, I think Shaden Sharp interviewed with them, and that wasn't really reported.
Okay.
Benedict Mathurin, it wasn't reported at the combine that he interviewed with the Wizards, but it turns out that he did. So he's on their radar. He did not make a visit, at least the last time we talked to him, which was last week. He did a pre-draft press conference. The only teams he visited were the 6th, 7th, and 8th picks. So I think he might have a pretty good idea of the range that he's going in. One guy I wonder about, and this is pure speculation, is AJ Griffin. Now that he is maybe falling down the draft board, although if he was there at 10, it would be a no-brainer for me. I would pick him. I think he's going to be a really good player. But maybe he could be a guy that they would have brought in for a last-second workout. Again, that's pure speculation. I'm not sure if they actually did that.
Right. Yeah, Shaden Sharp is very intriguing. Of course, his story with Kentucky, nobody has seen him play since his high school career, and there's a lot of question marks about him not playing at Kentucky as well. Ochai Agbaji, I do like a lot. I know he's a senior, and everybody doesn't like guys who are 21 years old, but the guy can play. He's athletic and he can shoot. The Wizards need shooters. They need guys that can stretch the floor for sure. Benedict Mathurin would be a huge home run pick if he fell to 10. AJ Griffin is intriguing too. I know the injuries are concerned, but he did play all his college career, and he can really shoot the lights out. And he was on a team that had Paolo, Mark Williams, Trevor Kills. So he's a guy that had to fit in where he could. There wasn't a lot of shots to go around. He was able to mesh well with other guys that could score.
And he did all that at 18 years old, by the way.
Right.
I think that's really impressive.
Right. Yeah. I think he would come in and play. He would be a steal at pick 10. Do you see the Wizards passing up on Shaden Sharp if he fell to pick 10?
That's a really tough question to answer. I don't think he's going to be there at 10.
Mm-hmm.
But I could also see if he was there, that I don't know if the Wizards would take that type of risk. There's been some mixed reports about how he's fared in workouts, how he's fared in interviews. I would just lean towards no, but it would be like a 51-49 type of situation because his talent is really, really intriguing. Like when you watch him, it's not just the athleticism and the bounce around the rim. It's his ability to create off the dribble. It would just take time. And I mean, there's reports that his camp is trying to send those signals out that like he wants to land in a situation that's going to take the long view. I wonder if the Wizards can take the long view to that extent. For instance, like a Benedict Mathurin, obviously you're banking on his long-term potential, but he could probably find minutes in the rotation right away. Shaden Sharp, what can you really expect from him year one and maybe even year two, right? He's such a raw prospect and he's such a mystery because he didn't play at all at Kentucky. So I don't know. My guess is that he's not there at 10 and that they don't have to make that decision.
Right. Yeah. Somebody during his Tommy Shepard's presser, and if there's any quotes that stood out to you, you can say them as well. But there was one that stood out to me was somebody asked him about the potential guys that they're looking at pick 10. And he said, what do they all have in common? And he said that they'll be available. That kind of believes me to think that he may reach on a player. Rui was a guy that nobody really had at pick 9, and Rui's worked out fine. But what did you take from that quote?
Well, I think it might have been expressing confidence that, they'll get a good player. It could be a matter of, some of the guys that they like are different than what we're seeing on the mock drafts. But if he's looking at players that maybe we think are going to go later, I think this draft's going to play out very differently. I think it's going to be like 2020 where maybe one, maybe two players are projected to go much higher and they fall. We saw that with Denny Avdia and we saw that with Tyrese Halliburton. I think that's what's going to happen in this draft. And it's going to be a situation where the Wizards are there at 10 and they find someone who's available, who was like their 4th or 5th guy on the board or maybe a little bit lower than that. And they just have to trust their board and take them. That's my guess, just because there's so much unpredictability with this draft. I'm pretty confident Jabari Smith Jr. is going to be the number 1 pick, right? But after that, I mean, it's a real guessing game. I don't think, Paolo Banchero is going to fall to them, but maybe it is an AJ Griffin. Maybe it is a Shaden Sharp where they just can't pass up that type of talent at 10. If they were to quote unquote reach, and I say that in quotes because, ultimately the mock drafts are projections. We don't know exactly what their board looks like. Maybe they would take like a Tari Eason, who I think I saw in a mock draft recently was like the 17th projected guy. He just fits so much of what they could use in the short term and the long term because he's a defender, he's a two-way player, he's a pretty decent shooter. I think he's got some offensive upside. So maybe that would be a guy who would represent Wizards fans are surprised that that's who they took at 10. But who knows? I think it's going to go in the other direction, like I said, where someone's going to fall and we're going to be surprised that they're there at 10.
Right. What would you say is the best case scenario for the Wizards on draft night? And what's the worst case scenario?
I think the best case scenario for them is Dyson Daniels to be there at 10. Maybe Mathurin being there at 10 would also represent a best case scenario. But those are two guys that when the pre-draft process began, they immediately stood out to me as great fits for the Wizards in the short term and the long term. But apparently other people thought the same thing because they were like, my initial thought was like, why are these guys at the back end of the lottery? They should be top 10 picks. And that's ultimately what has happened, right? So I think they'll both be gone. I think they're going to go like 7th and 8th, maybe. I think they'll both be off the board. So a worst case scenario would probably include neither of them being available, and probably AJ Griffin and Shaedon Sharpe being gone. And then you're picking between like Johnny Davis, Jeremy Sohan, Tari Eason, which I could make the case for any of those guys, but I think a best case scenario would be one of the players that I mentioned previously. Dyson Daniels, though, would be the best case scenario, in my opinion, because you look at what the Wizards need. No player in this draft, or at least in their projected range, fills more than Dyson Daniels. He's a point guard. He's big. He is one of the very best defensive players in this draft. He might be the best defensive player at his position in this draft. He's a really good rebounder as a guard. The Wizards had a lot of trouble rebounding that position after losing Russell Westbrook. And he's also a pass-first guy, and that's the type of point guard that they want. And while shooting is a concern for him, I think he could develop that over time. And I also think it's an underrated aspect of what the Wizards need is just a point guard to set up high percentage shots for other players. Like when they brought in Ish Smith, they shot better from three after that, in part because they had a point guard who was running the offense in a traditional way. And I think that's what they're looking for. And I think that's what Dyson Daniels would do for them.
Yeah, I think he's a solid passer, and he has some athleticism there, and he is a disruptive defensive player. His long arms and a long wingspan as well, where he can get down and defend at the point of attack. I was going to bring up that shooting concern, but also Kyle Kuzma. Have the Wizards started any contract extension talks with him with his player option coming up next season?
I don't think so. I think the one they're focused on the most is Bradley Beal's, and I think they'll go from there. Rui Hachimura is another question in that regard. I think for him, it would make a lot of sense to bet on himself. Kyle Kuzma, maybe after the second half of the year that he had, and I could see it being a little bit more likely with that, but I don't get the sense that, they've been at the negotiating table in any real sense.
All right. So before you go, we'll get a bold prediction from you. And, I know you're not a betting guy, but if you had to put money down on a draft pick for the Wizards at pick 10, or do you think they would move up to pick 7? What's your bold prediction, and who's the player that you think the Wizards come away with on draft night?
Well, bold prediction and who I think they'll come away with might be different answers. Bold prediction would be, I think AJ Griffin falls and they take him, and they bank on the fact that he's a 45% 3-point shooter, and that's their biggest need. But if I had to bet, if like I was putting money on the table, I think I'd go with Johnny Davis, because I think he is Tommy's type, and that he's sort of a high floor, smart guy. He would check off a box in the sense that he's a guard. Maybe he could play a little bit of at the point guard position, and he defends. So I think the mentality and the type of player that he is, I think that kind of fits their mold. So if I was betting, it'd be Johnny Davis, but I think the bold prediction is AJ Griffin. But I have to note, I've been given different answers to these types of questions because I'm going back and forth on it. Like yesterday, someone asked me, I said Tari Eason. So I think Tari Eason has to be mentioned in that conversation. But if you're telling me I got to put down money, I'm going to go with Johnny Davis.
All right. Do you think they would take a look at Nikola Jovic or Ousmane Dieng? Would you put that in that category too?
I doubt it. I think those guys are probably going to go later in the teens, if not the 20s. I know ESPN all of a sudden says Ousmane Dieng is potentially going to be a top 10 pick, but I'll believe it when I see it. I watch his film. He's very raw. He's got great size and versatility, and there's some feel for the game. Kind of reminds me of Denny Avdia, honestly. But we saw how Denny Avdia was over projected by ESPN. I think the same thing might be happening here.
Right. All right. Well, you heard it here from guys from Chase. If you are putting down bets on Bet Online, he has Johnny Davis as the pick, and Johnny Davis does have a Taco Bell commercial. We do have some luck there, as Nikola Jokic, when he was drafted, the Taco Bell commercial was on when he was drafted. So maybe there's some.
It's a good point.
Some luck. Yeah, maybe there's some luck we can get there. And I do like Johnny Davis too. He plays with his hair on fire. Big Ten Player of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, averaged 8 rebounds a game, which is ridiculous for a guard, and 19 points a game. The guy can score and fill it up, and I do think he does fit that dog role for the Wizards. So I think he would be a solid pick.
Yeah, it would make sense. The only thing is the shooting, 30% from 3-point range. For a team that struggles in that area, they would have to make sure that develops over the next few years.
Right. All right, Chase, I just want to thank you for coming on, and thank you guys for listening. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. Search now for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey Sports experts, the draft experts of Locked On NBA Big Board. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. And Chase, is there anything that you have to plug? Coming up?
Well, just a article I wrote today I think was pretty cool. Anonymous quotes from a former Wizards coach, just breaking down some of the prospects and how they would fit in Washington, including Shaedon Sharpe, AJ Griffin, Jalen Duren. So make sure you check that out.
Yeah. All right, Chase, I just want to thank you guys. Thank you for coming on. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you guys subscribe on YouTube and hit the notification bell. Hail to the Wizards.